So, ladies and gentlemen, fighting with a ice hockey game is not easy, so I'll try to keep you awake for my presentation. Luckily, we're not on a game against Sweden, then I guess I would be watching the game with you as well. But anyway, let's cheer if there's a goal. So, we all agree that we cheer if there's a goal. It's my pleasure to give you a presentation today, not that much actually on disruption and technologies itself, but rather like talking about how you get from disruption thinking to disruption doing. And I'll start by saying that, with my background, basically what I've done throughout my career is I've actually worked over 22 years with technology companies, bigger ones like Nokia and Sonera, and then several of my own startups. I'm a founder in 7 companies and investor in 22. But I also work with bigger companies as a board member, and I've had my share of CFOs as well. So I think I can relate to the audience in many ways. But my day job is really to work with my own startups, and recently I merged my 2 companies, Pivot5 with Industry Hack. And Industry Hack, in a very nutshell, has a mission. And our mission is really to help people to solve big challenges together. And we do it by basically connecting corporations with the global community of solvers. And often these problems are solvable with technology. And there really are plenty of problems to solve in the world. So whether it's environmental or societal or political or even business-related problems, often you need to have completely new aspect in order to solve the problem. And the most scarce resource that any company today has is not the ideas, it's the actual talent and the people. And what Industry Hack does is that we actually bring together the solver community with the bigger corporations. So our customers are the largest Nordic public companies. And for those, we actually facilitate an open innovation process where we help them to define their most biggest digital problems and discover the right teams to solve them through open innovation process, and then basically challenge model through which the bigger companies can discover feasible partners, projects, pilots, and then eventually create ventures. But coming back to the disruption, firstly, I'd like to say to all of you who are thinking about like new digital projects or ideas or innovation or using technology for your next stage business model is that welcome to the marathon. And why marathon? Marathon because, it's a different thing to think about it or to prepare for one, or then actually to execute one. And execution is really the key item, what I tend to emphasize in any of the companies that I work with. Ideas are cheap. Anyone has great ideas. Anyone here has fantastic ideas, and whatever idea you might be thinking about internally in your company, let me guarantee to you there are like probably 100 and most likely 1,000 different startups who are trying to do the same thing. It's not the idea that matters, it's the execution. And sometimes to get that motivation for the marathon, you of course need to look a little bit far ahead. And I think we all can agree that this digital and technological disruption will impact. How it will impact is extremely difficult to define. So my following slides will give you a little bit of, let's say, brainstorming and get you up to the mood, like, what kind of world are we going to talk about in around 5 to 10 years. So we're going to see extremely huge evolution in various kinds of technologies and services, and in practically what it means that, basically, we're going to be basically attached to sensors in many ways. And eventually the sensors will be also the services and devices which will become our doctors. And of course, none of us will drive in the future. Basically, the driving skills will become scarce over the next 20 to 30 years because actually the devices and the cars drive themselves. Someone else plans your food, delivers it to your home, and the mailman finds you automatically. You have super nice colleagues who might be even more intelligent than you and become your boss. And of course, the companies will change. We will start working ecosystems and in networked organizations. And what it actually means is something that the previous speakers were kind of talking about is that the customers will not necessarily mean the same thing as it meant to you earlier. Customers come through your API integration. You have to kind of tap your platform and your value-adding solution to various other platforms in order to be able to generate revenue and new business. We will live in cities. 80% of the population in the world will live in cities. And of course, our future relationships might evolve into various kinds. So eventually, when I'm talking about technological disruption, it's not that much about technology. Technology is an enabler, but it is more of a cultural disruption, which will eventually also mean that the consumer behavior will change. And once the consumer behavior change, all of the companies that as of today with a traditional vertical integration kind of exist, whether they would be like very traditional industrial companies, will disappear. And as we know, in most of the cases, whenever there is a platform economy opportunity, most likely the platform eventually will win once it gets enough foothold. And that's what kind of I called a big bang disruption. And typically these big bang disruptions are very difficult to identify. But once you are able to see it coming, it's already a bit too late. So seeing already this slide, I'm sure that everyone has seen that, how the new business models can be kind of taken into different industry analogies. I think it's extremely important to kind of always, in the management teams, to stop thinking like, okay, what would be the big bang in our industry? So one thing is certain, and one certainty is that there's a lot of uncertainty ahead. So basically, you as CFOs, financial experts, leaders, executives are going to have to start thinking and executing in a new way. And this is where the startups come relevant. Startups by default are defined as organizations that are extremely capable of navigating through uncertain environments with one mission, and that one mission is to discover a new scalable business model. And if we think about this definition of a startup for a while, actually I think you can kind of utilize that same definition for any established corporation. Any new business idea, any new business opportunity, any new business model evolution, eventually in your company by default is a startup. So executing is a challenging thing. And one thing what big companies are very good at is of course working on this. So let's have a workshop, let's do some PowerPoints. Big companies, for some weird reason, tend to start working from not outside in, but rather like inside out, and getting into committees and meetings and thinking about like what the future really could be. And big companies really master the PowerPoint execution. I know, I used to work in a couple of very big global companies. But let's think what is really the mastering skill of a disruptor company? Well, it is really listening to the customer. And I think there were a few presentations earlier today which were talking about customer centricity. And it's easier said than done. If you ask any CEO or any management team member, like, what is your company very good at? And then typically the answer is that we're very good in listening customers. But in reality, that tends not to be the case. And there's a lot of, let's say, statistical evidence around that. But I think it's like super interesting and intellectually inspiring thought to think around like, so how come some people then eventually really master the new sport like this one? And what are the skills that you need to learn in order to master the new sport? So moving from marathon to snowboarding. And I've developed my own, let's say, kind of a theoretical framework around it. And this is my only theoretical slide I'm going to show to you. And these, I think, are the key elements what you need to master. So firstly, you're going to have to develop a big enough purpose. Basically, your own vision of the future, because future is unknown. So you can't kind of rely on any given data out there. You're going to have to develop your own view of the future as well as your own purpose. And then in order to start exploring and building that future, you're going to have to build a portfolio of experiments. Some of these might be like super small, marketing related experiments. Some of them might be extremely big ones, but you still need to do them step by step. So they might be relating to deploying AI and neural networks and machine learning in your own. Hey, by the way, did we score? I think we scored. Fantastic. Woo! Go Finland. But so some of these experiments might be, really big investments. And in order to create your own competencies, you're going to have to develop your own innovation ecosystem. Because none of the companies today out there, despite maybe few exceptions of these data giants, really can master all those technical skills that are needed for the future. That talent lies somewhere else. You will never be able to, let's say, recruit all the right talent. You're going to have to work through ecosystems. And then two more is really the new assets. Defining the new assets that you're basically going to build for the next 5 years. If it's data assets, customer understanding, new distribution assets, or similar. So your kind of an asset definition as a CFO has to change. And then, of course, unless you have that customer-centric culture, basically, it'll be extremely difficult to succeed. So let's think about all of these elements and talk about them a bit by bit. Defining the game where you're in, that big purpose, that big, let's say, vision of the future, doesn't always have to be extraordinary unique, like printing, human organs or building a space shuttle. It can be also, something quite concrete and purposeful. For one of my portfolio companies, which is called Happy or Not, which probably everyone knows through these smiley faces that people press, we defined that our purpose is really to enable the customer happiness and customer feedback on a real-time basis for our customers. And we started with a very small offering, which was that self-standing booth into which we inserted a 3G and later 4G SIM, global SIM, and you could just ship it over. Very low entry barrier, but over the time, that vision, that capability to provide that real-time customer feedback measurement for our customers has actually become a self-fulfilling prophecy, and nowadays we do that across all the potential other devices as well, and really have been able to conquer a global footprint of customers, starting from NASA to Disney and Nike and so forth, with a unique analytics business. So what I'm saying here that, of course, the vision and the mission has to be purposeful, but it can be also quite concrete and tangible. The critical question, on the other hand, is not just defining that purpose, but in a way to ask the right questions. And here are a few examples what we've done inside Industry Hack with our customers. So we've helped, for example, companies like Lassila and Tikanoja to discover what would be the ways to recycle better, or Fortum to build their next generation digital energy company. But even also in purposeful missions like helping students not to drop out from schools. And why do you need these key questions and key, let's say, problem definitions is that big enough purposes and challenges also inspire the right talent. And if we think about the scarcity of the talent, what kind of talent will you need tomorrow for your future business? Have you defined that? Very rarely, actually, companies have defined that. And there are only a few bigger players who actually have created their talent map and even started from their board of directors, where they've completely changed the skill sets and the profiles of the people to match the future vision that they have. And this should happen across the company. You teaching an elephant to dance is extremely difficult. So bringing that new talent is extremely purposeful in a sense, because that will also start speeding up the change in your own organization. But you need to also bring the new talent close to the problem. And this is what we do. For example, here, AI and machine learning expert is working on Ponce industrial machine and really trying to understand how computer vision could be helping the forestry worker in their work. Or we've also taken, software coders to paper mills, as well as used various other technologies with our customers. So this approach of building new things with an agile approach is of course very meaningful and self-given. Everyone talks about agile development and not trying to build a car while you're can start small, but also bringing people together close to these real environments and teaching them what the reality really is in the factory or in the bank or in the supply chain is extremely essential as well. And why building a portfolio is essential, it's of course due to the fact that as you guys are specialists in measuring the financial value, most likely a big part of these trials fail. And this is one of the reasons why actually I think big companies have challenges in both working with startups and building their own portfolio of experiments. And the theory goes a bit like this. If you think about bigger corporations, a bit like parents and adults, and technology startups as babies. Many of the bigger companies actually tend to work with startups in a very point-to-point manner, not in a systematic way. And of course, there's a lot of hype and a lot of opportunities, but then eventually, of course, if one of the startups fails, then there starts to be a question like, okay, who's really looking after this one, and why did this one fail, or why is the one company gone, and so forth. It doesn't match the structured thinking of a bigger company. That's why you need also a structured ecosystem strategy. And this structured approach of trials, in my opinion, enables you to actually focus to the right questions at the right time. So when you're in the idea discovery phase, you should kind of focus into asking what are really the domains that we want to play in the future? Are we going to be in the mobility services? Are we going to be in providing well-being services to our customer? Are we going to move completely to a new industry? And when you start testing and validating those ideas, basically the key question should be is this idea or concept really even worth of implementing? Can this idea work? Can we really use blockchain in order to authenticate, for example, manufacturing, supply chain, or similar? And once you get to the minimum viable product stage, it's really about customer development. It's about is there a customer who can basically find value in this idea? Can we basically discover a bigger market opportunity around this? And what could really the product market fit by developing the offering with a matching market and customer segment? What could it be, and what could that scalable business opportunity be? And whether you're developing something that would actually eventually integrate to your own core business or become a bit like independent new business, it doesn't matter. You kind of need to take this path anyway. And if you don't have enough ideas and testing stage and MVP stage projects in your portfolio, you will never kind of get that implementation and scaling into place, because most of the startups fail, as do the digital projects as well. So learning is extremely important, and learning is most essential due to that nobody knows it anyway. You're going to have to discover it yourself. Of course, setting the right ambition level is extremely essential, as well as is setting the metered funding. You shouldn't, let's say, overwhelm your projects with too much funding or too little. And target setting can be in many ways, can be done in many ways. The challenge, what I often see in bigger companies and corporations, of course, is that we tend to love these financial metrics. And it might be eventually that this financial metric in the beginning doesn't measure anything. If you're aiming to get your conversion rate to 2% or 30%, it doesn't really matter if you're investing too much money into marketing in the first place. It might be more important to discover those customers who are extremely passionate about the product or the new service. And as you fail and don't necessarily discover it in the first place or in the second place, it doesn't necessarily also mean that you should kill the project. Killing these projects is, of course, is very critical, because you can't keep them all alive in the future. But also, identifying that was this just a learning, what we should take and retry something else, i.e. to pivot, or is this really not worth of pursuing further? I always tend to say that if you have like super passionate people about the service or the product or the idea who are willing to, as a customers, to take it forward and take your message forward, that is a great way to measure. And then, of course, like later on, you're going to have to talk about conversion rates and customer lifecycle value and customer acquisition cost, or like what is really the scalability of the new business model and so forth. And most often, actually, with these new opportunities, very small base of the customer generates most of the revenues. Regardless, what you do, the competitive landscape will be very different. And thinking about these 5 items that I kind of listed in my strategic framework, key item to realize, of course, is that your competitive advantage will be very different in the digital space than in the traditional space. So you're going to have to kind of be faster and more cost efficient and more powerful than any of your global competitors. And in order to do this, most likely you're going to have to start building your own data assets. And this is an extremely difficult topic for many of the companies here or in any other industry. Because what companies then start to easily think that we're going to start gathering our data asset and we're not going to let anyone else to work on our data asset. And like the CDO of Wärtsilä said once, like, who cares? As long as I have the rights to use the data, I'm fine. I don't even have to, own the data. But the point, of course, is that how do you start cultivating the data is a key item, and particularly in the platform-driven business models. Like, Volt, they know better what people here in Helsinki eat than the restaurant keepers themselves. Or like, basically, if you take a maritime industry, you might have players like Marecast who can forecast where the vessels are going, as well as how the logistical basically shipments are moving around and so forth. So eventually, there will be this life above and below the API. Data assets can be gathered in many ways. I've done one big exercise with Indoor Atlas company that I'm an investor in, which develops a positioning technology. And we, for example, created a model where we actually provide the core SDK for Baidu in China. And we've started to gather our data asset there in order to, at some day, maybe monetize it in somehow. So we don't yet have a full understanding how we're going to do that. But we're kind of investing into that because we believe that over time it will give us a better competitive advantage compared to other players in the market. So my point here is that the growth formula for these new digital initiatives are going to be very different. So you can't necessarily compare apples and bananas with each other. But basically, as a leader, what you're going to have to do is, of course, is to make everyone to see the potential and the future and the opportunity in a similar way and start acting on it. And here are the few things which I always want to emphasize when I talk about, let's say, disruption, doing, and not thinking. Firstly, just start hiring different kind of people. There is a certain framework and paradigm and a certain kind of a profile of people that you've used to work with. Start hiring different people. People who are more of an explorers, a bit more difficult personalities, don't always fit the corporate profile, but who are the people who take the risk and also start going to the unknown direction, are capable of leading the rest of the pack with them. Second thing is that you need to act every day, even on small things. Basically embracing this new change, new tools, new ways of working, new ways of sharing, and kind of walking the talk. Maybe distributing your time differently than what you used to do in the past. And we often say that, yes, but I kind of take action every day. But if you think about the purposeful action, your future purpose, and how tied your actions are towards that person, actually statistics show that very few of us actually take purposeful action. So this might be something that you reconsider when you look into the Mero tomorrow. Because often, we have this reality distortion field. We have a great vision, but eventually our execution and our focus is in completely wrong areas, and that's why, bigger ships tend to sail sometimes to a wrong direction. So culture itself, eventually will drive the results. And culture, in a way, starts from you and the people that you hire and the way they work. Of course, some new tools are needed, and what I would suggest is that you start defining those new tools, whether it's a new communication tool or a new kind of a environment for putting different kinds of people together, or opening up an API to your data asset to outside developers in order to start learning. You're going to have to define what these tools for your growth are. And most importantly, of course, how do you help your ecosystem to work with your tools? And with the first fail, don't quit, to retry and do it again, and eventually start building the future, which most likely is something that you can't predict, but start predicting by building. So thank you for this. I hope you're going to start building concretely something already tomorrow.